There was a time when the only guy you looked at in a band was the singer. The shift towards other members becoming stars started during the 60s when bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones showed that other members were just as important as the guy standing out front. Bands became experimental, and with this, a new audience emerged looking for something different. This was the time established musicians moved beyond the groups that made their name and joined forces with other musicians to create entirely new entities called the Supergroup. So, with that being said, here's our pick of the top 10 supergroups of all time. Beck, Bogert, and Appice. Hailed as the rhythm section for one of heavy rock's forerunners, Vanilla Fudge, vocalist-bassist Tim Bogert and drummer Carmen Appice hooked up with legendary guitarist Jeff Beck in this, our first group in our top 10. Beck was already a solo artist and was hailed a guitar hero. He had played with the Yardbirds back in the 60s, and word has it that he frequently crossed paths with Bogert and Appice over the years. Once formed, the trio spent most of 1973 touring across the globe in support of their one and only album simply called Beck, Bogert and Appice. Alas, the group wasn't meant to be, and the trio dissolved early the next year while recording its follow-up. Emerson, Lake and Palmer. As with our last entry, there was no band name suggested for this supergroup other than the last names of the three members, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or ELP for short. The trio was formed in 1970, and each member's resume was already rather impressive. Keith Emerson had been with the Nice, Greg Lake was with the heavyweights King Crimson, and Carl Palmer had stints with Atomic Rooster and the Crazy World of Arthur Brown. All of the bands we just mentioned would be good on anyone's resume, but all of them were mere mortals compared to the huge success that Emerson, Lake and Palmer would go on to achieve. Journey. Yep, that's right, Journey. What a lot of people may not know or tend to forget is that Journey started out as a Santana offshoot and was all about serious art rock and not big-time radio-friendly AOR music. Journey was the mastermind of Santana manager Herbie Herbert, who in 1973 poached keyboard vocalist Greg Raleigh and guitarist Neil Schon away from Santana, as well as bassist Ross Valerie and rhythm guitarist George Tickner out of psychedelic outfit Fruminous Bandersnatch, and the drummer Ainsley Dunbar, who'd played with the Jeff Beck group. The first three albums did okay, but when the band had a refit and Soul Survivors Schon and Valerie brought in new singer Steve Perry, this was the game changer and ushered in an arena-conquering second phase of the band. Blind Faith. This band was a serious case of one and done. The self-titled album was released in 1969 and was something of a spur-of-the-moment hangover for former Cream members Eric Clapton and Ginger Baker, who also recruited Spencer Davis Group and Traffic members Steve Winwood and Rick Gretsch. Blind Faith claimed the number one spots on both the US and UK charts, and the album also yielded some classic tunes, Winwood's Can't Find My Way Home and Clapton's Presence of the Lord. Bad Company. Formed in 1973, Bad Company were the epitome of a supergroup. Paul Rodgers on vocals and Simon Kirke on drums were paired with Mott the Hoople's Mick Ralphs on guitar and King Crimson's Boz Burrell on bass. That in itself is something to talk about, but they were also the first band to sign to Peter Grant and Led Zeppelin's label Swan Song. Their eponymous 1974 debut was an international smash, and it topped the US album charts and scored a number one single with Can't Get Enough of Your Love. Asia. Asia assembled the best of the best prog rockers. That included vocalist-bassist John Wetton from King Crimson, guitarist Steve Howe from Yes, keyboard player Jeff Downes, who'd been with Yes and MTV darlings The Buggles, and drummer Carl Palmer, the P in ELP. They were 80s AOR at its most bombastic, and their 1982 debut took off like a rocket, with several hit singles and videos that were played incessantly on MTV. You'd have thought this train was never going to stop, but not so fast. They split and were gone as quick as they came, and years later, there were two competing versions of the band on tour. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. What can he say about this supergroup that the name doesn't already say? David Crosby of the Byrds, Stephen Stills of Buffalo Springfield, Graham Nash of the Hollies, and of course the oldest punk rocker on the block, Neil Young. They really do epitomize the term supergroup. You knew there was magic when their vocal harmonies took over the radio airwaves and sent the audience into a trance at Max Yazga's farm during the Woodstock Festival, which, by the way, was their second gig ever. There is a strong argument that you could say that Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young were more responsible than any other act for introducing the supergroup concept into the mainstream. Derek and the Dominos. Eric Clapton's second appearance on this list is as a member of Derek and the Dominos. Ironically, he used the Derek and the Dominos pseudonym to avoid supergroup connotations. Eric roped in drummer Jim Gordon, who'd played with the Beach Boys and Everly Brothers, keyboardist Bobby Whitlock, and bass player Carl Radle, alongside a slide player named Skydog, who was in fact Dwayne Allman. Even though the band's album proved to be yet another one-off, albeit a double album, and the fact that a Dominos tour never took place, this band has one of the most recognizable names, and for sure, one of the most recognizable songs in rock history, Layla. The Traveling Wilburies. The term supergroup is totally met with this lineup. The Traveling Wilburies are the very definition of superstars in a supergroup. Covering every generation of rock and roll royalty, the band included a who's who of rock and roll legends. 50s rocker Roy Orbison, folk legend Bob Dylan, a Beatle in George Harrison, rock royalty in Tom Petty, and ELO's genius writer and producer to the stars, Jeff Lynne. And when you have the drumming talents of session player Jim Keltner, you have supergroup heaven. Orbison sadly passed before the Wilburys recorded their second album, but their first was, and is to this day, an absolute classic. Cream. It's that man again, Eric Clapton. Formed in 1966, Cream were the original power trio, and their name was pretty self-explanatory. They were literally comprised of the cream of London's musical elite. Clapton at the time was a former Yardbirds and Bluesbreaker member and was hailed as the second coming in swinging 60s London. Jack Bruce was a vocalist, songwriter and bassist extraordinaire, and Ginger Baker was a drummer known for his drumming prowess in rock, R&B, as well as jazz. During the course of just 3 years and 4 albums, Cream would define virtually all the rules of supergroup status. They wrote and released game-changing singles like Sunshine of Your Love and Badge, but as with most of these bands, Cream's supergroup life cycle was relatively short. But their presence and influence can be seen and heard in the music industry to this very day. So there you have it. Please like and subscribe and follow us at rockmyworld.com.